Bernard was a tall, dark and handsome man. He had a kind heart and a strong will, but life had not been easy for him. No matter how hard he worked, he barely made enough money to survive. Annabelle was different from many women Bernard had met. She was beautiful, wise, and 2 years older than him. They met in church one Sunday after service. Annabelle was sitting alone, lost in thought, when Bernard walked up to her. "Good afternoon, sister," he greeted her with a warm smile. Annabelle looked up and smiled back. "Good afternoon. You are Bernard, right?" "Yes," Bernard said, surprised that she knew his name. "I've seen you a few times." "You always sit in the front row," Annabelle said. Bernard chuckled. "Yes, I like to hear the pastor clearly. His words give me strength." That was how their conversation started. They talked about life, faith, and their dreams. Bernard told Annabelle about his struggles and she listened with care. She too had her challenges, but she believed things would get better one day. As they spoke, Bernard felt a connection. Annabelle understood him in a way no one else did. At that moment he knew he wanted to be with her. "Annabelle, can we be more than friends?" he asked suddenly. Annabelle was taken aback. She hadn't expected that. She liked Bernard, but there was one problem. "Bernard, you are a good man, but I am older than you," she said. Bernard laughed softly. "Age is just a number, Annabelle. What matters is how we feel about each other." Annabelle thought about it for days. She liked Bernard, but the age difference worried her. Would people talk? Would their families accept it? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized Bernard was right. Age did not matter. What mattered was love. One evening she called Bernard. "I have thought about it," she said. "Age is just a number. I will give us a chance." Bernard was overjoyed. He promised to love and respect her forever. They started dating and their love grew stronger every day. After a year of dating, Bernard and Annabelle got married. Their wedding was small but filled with happiness. Friends and family celebrated with them. They believed love would be enough to build their future. At first, their marriage was full of joy. They laughed, prayed, and supported each other. Every night, Bernard would hold Annabelle close and whisper, "No matter what happens, we will always have each other." But love alone could not put food on the table. Bernard worked hard, but his income was not enough. Annabelle tried to start a small business, but it failed. They struggled to buy food and sometimes they slept hungry. The rent was due and they had no money to pay. Life became harder each day. One night, Bernard sat on the small wooden chair in their one-room apartment, his head in his hands. "Annabelle, I don't know what to do anymore," he said. "I feel like a failure." Annabelle knelt beside him and held his hands. "You are not a failure, my love. We will find a way. We just have to keep trying." But no matter how much they tried, nothing worked. One morning, as Bernard was walking home from a failed job interview, his phone rang. It was his old friend, Chuka. "Bernard, I have good news for you," Chuka said. Bernard's heart skipped a beat. "Good news? What is it?" "There is a job opening. A very rich woman in Lagos needs a driver. She is paying big money," Chuka said excitedly. Bernard's eyes widened. "Really? But will she employ me?" "Yes, you just have to go for the interview," Chuka assured him. Bernard felt a rush of hope. Finally, a chance to change their lives. That night he told Annabelle about the job. "Finally, some good news," Annabelle said with a smile. Bernard nodded. "I will go for the interview tomorrow. I pray I get the job." Annabelle held his hand. "You will. I believe in you." For the first time in a long while, Bernard went to bed with hope in his heart. He had no idea that this job would change his life forever. The next morning, Bernard woke up early. He dressed in his best shirt and trousers, the only decent clothes he had. Annabelle helped him adjust his collar, her eyes filled with hope. "Go and do your best," she said. Bernard nodded and smiled. "I will. Pray for me." "I always do," Annabelle whispered. Bernard left the house and made his way to the rich woman's mansion. When he arrived, he was stunned. The house was enormous, with high walls, golden gates, and a neatly trimmed garden. Expensive cars were parked in the driveway. A security guard let him in after checking his name on the interview list. Bernard stepped into the large sitting room, his heart pounding. Everything looked expensive. The sparkling chandelier, the leather couches, the marble floors. Then she walked in. The woman was tall, elegant, and dressed in a silk gown. She looked to be in her mid-40s, yet she carried herself with the grace of a queen. Her name was Madame Veronica, and she was one of the wealthiest businesswomen in Lagos. She studied Bernard with sharp eyes. "You are here for the driver's job?" "Yes, Ma," Bernard said respectfully. She walked around him, looking him up and down. "Have you been a driver before?" "Yes, Ma," he lied. He had driven a few times but had never worked as a professional driver. He needed this job. Madame Veronica nodded. "You look strong. Can you handle long hours?" "I have meetings all over the city, sometimes late at night." "Yes, Ma." "I can," Bernard replied confidently. She continued to study him. Bernard felt nervous under her gaze. Finally she spoke. "I don't like hiring just anyone, but you seem decent. I'll give you a chance." Bernard's heart leaped. "Thank you, Ma." She raised a hand. "But there's something I need to know. Are you married?" Bernard froze. His breath caught in his throat. Married? Why was she asking that? Chuka never mentioned anything about marriage being a problem. He swallowed hard. Ma. "I asked if you are married," she repeated. "I prefer my driver to be fully available. No family distractions." Bernard felt his hands grow cold. If he said yes, he might lose the job. If he said no, it would be a lie. Annabelle's face flashed in his mind. His sweet, loving wife. The woman who prayed for him, who encouraged him, who believed in him. Then another thought came: poverty. The hunger, the unpaid rent, the struggles. This job could change their lives. Before he could stop himself, the words slipped out. "I am single, Ma." Madame Veronica nodded, satisfied. "Good. You start tomorrow." Bernard left the mansion feeling a mix of emotions. He had the job, but at what cost? The next day, Bernard officially became Madame Veronica's driver. His salary was beyond anything he had ever earned before. With his first paycheck, he paid off their debts, bought enough food for the house, and even got Annabelle a new dress. Annabelle was overjoyed. "God has finally answered our prayers," she said, hugging him. Bernard smiled but felt a deep guilt inside. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Days turned into weeks and Bernard got used to his new job. He drove Madame Veronica around Lagos, from business meetings to fancy restaurants to late-night parties. She was a powerful woman, and everywhere she went, people treated her with respect. But there was something else. Madame Veronica was beginning to look at him differently. At first, it was small things. A smile that lingered too long, the way she would rest her hand on his shoulder when giving instructions. Then she started asking personal questions. "Bernard, do you have a girlfriend?" He hesitated. "No, Ma." She smiled. "A handsome man like you? I find that hard to believe." Bernard forced a chuckle. "I've been too busy trying to survive, Ma." She laughed, a rich, deep sound. "That's why you need someone to take care of you." Bernard felt a strange tension in the air. He ignored it. One evening, after a long day of driving, Madame Veronica asked Bernard to come inside for a drink. "It's late," she said. "You must be tired. Relax a little." Bernard hesitated. He should go home. Annabelle would be waiting. But refusing Madame Veronica didn't feel like an option. He sat on the couch as she poured 2 glasses of wine. She handed him one and sat beside him, too close. "Bernard, do you like your job?" she asked. "Yes, Ma. Very much," he said. "Good. I take care of those who are loyal to me." She looked at him, her eyes deep and unreadable. "You are a strong man. Hardworking. I like that." Bernard felt his heart race. "Thank you, Ma." She leaned in slightly. "You don't have to call me Ma. Just Veronica is fine." Bernard felt a lump in his throat. "Hey, Veronica." She smiled. "That's better." A dangerous silence followed. Then softly she asked, "Do you ever think about the future, Bernard?" He nodded. "Yes, Ma, I mean Veronica. What if I told you I could make your future better? Much better." Bernard looked at her, confused. "How?" She leaned even closer, her voice smooth. "You are special, Bernard. I could do a lot for you. Give you more money, a better life. But only if you want it." Bernard understood what she meant. His stomach tightened. His palms felt sweaty. He thought of Annabelle. His loving wife. The woman who trusted him. But then he thought of the money. Comfort. The things he could never give Annabelle on his own. This woman could change his life forever. Bernard swallowed hard. He had to make a choice. And it was a choice that would change everything. Bernard stared at Madame Veronica, his mind racing. He understood her offer. She wasn't just talking about a better future. She wanted him. A part of him screamed to get up and leave. To run home to Annabelle. But another part, the part that remembered the hunger, the pain of poverty, kept him frozen in place. Madame Veronica reached out and touched his hand. Think about it, Bernard. I can make you very comfortable. No more struggling. Bernard forced a smile. I appreciate your kindness, Veronica. But I should go home now. She didn't look offended. Instead, she smiled knowingly. Take your time, Bernard. But remember, opportunities like this don't come often. Bernard left the mansion that night feeling like a man walking on a thin rope over fire. When he got home, Annabelle was waiting. She ran to him, hugging him tightly. I was so worried. You're never this late, she said. Bernard forced a smile. Traffic was bad, he lied. Annabelle sighed in relief. Come, I made your favorite, jollof rice and fried plantain. As he ate, Annabelle sat beside him, watching him with love in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, Bernard, she whispered. You've worked so hard for us. Bernard's chest tightened with guilt. That night, as Annabelle slept beside him, Bernard stared at the ceiling. Madame Veronica's words echoed in his head. I can make your future better. Only if you want it. The next few days he avoided being alone with her. He did his job, kept his distance and focused on his work. But Madame Veronica was not a woman who liked to be ignored. One evening, as Bernard parked the car in her compound, she spoke in a firm voice. Come inside, Bernard. We need to talk. Bernard hesitated but followed her into the house. She walked to the bar, poured herself a glass of wine and then turned to face him. Why are you running from me? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Bernard swallowed. I'm not, Ma. She smirked. Oh. So if I touch you now you won't run. Before he could react, she stepped closer and placed a hand on his chest. Bernard's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed at him to move, to push her away. But he didn't. She leaned in and whispered, I know you want this too. Stop pretending. And in that moment something inside Bernard snapped. The fear of losing his job. The hunger for a better life. The temptation of comfort. It all mixed together and he gave in. That night, Bernard crossed a line he could never uncross. The affair started slowly. Secret meetings, whispered conversations, stolen moments. Madame Veronica spoiled him with gifts. New clothes, expensive perfumes and extra money. Bernard justified it to himself. I'm doing this for Annabelle. To give her a better life. But the lies piled up quickly. He began coming home late, telling Annabelle he had to work extra hours. When he spent the night at Madame Veronica's mansion, he told Annabelle he was traveling for work. At first, Annabelle believed him. But soon she began to notice the changes. Bernard, you smell different, she said one night. Is that a new cologne? He laughed nervously. Oh yes. My boss gave it to me. She likes her workers to smell good. Annabelle smiled, unaware of the deeper meaning behind his words. But soon the distance between them grew. Bernard avoided looking into her eyes. When she held him, he felt guilty. One night, Annabelle sat beside him and held his hands. Bernard, are you happy? Bernard forced a smile. Of course I am. She studied him for a moment. Then why do I feel like I'm losing you? Bernard's heart pounded. He wanted to confess. To tell her everything. But how could he? Instead, he pulled her into his arms and whispered, You will never lose me, Annabelle. Never. But deep inside he knew he was lying. The affair continued for months. Bernard lived two lives. One as a devoted husband, the other as Madame Veronica's secret lover. Then one afternoon everything changed. Annabelle had grown tired of the distance. She missed her husband. I'll surprise Bernard at work today, she thought. She took a taxi to Madame Veronica's mansion. When she arrived, she saw Bernard standing outside, waiting beside the car. Her heart leaped with joy. She stepped forward. Bernard. Bernard turned, his eyes widening in horror. Annabelle. His voice was shaky. She rushed toward him. I wanted to see you. You are never home these days. Before Bernard could respond, the front door opened. Madame Veronica stepped out, looking elegant as always. She paused when she saw Annabelle. Who is this? She asked Bernard, her eyes narrowing. Bernard's mind spun. If he told the truth, he would lose everything. Before Annabelle could speak, Bernard forced a smile and said, "Oh, this is my mother." Silence. Annabelle felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. His mother. Madame Veronica's expression softened. "Oh, nice to meet you, Ma. Your son is a very good worker." Annabelle could barely breathe. She turned to Bernard, searching his eyes. But he refused to look at her. The betrayal hit her like a knife to the chest. Madame Veronica smiled warmly. "Would you like to come in, Ma?" Annabelle shook her head, her lips trembling. "No. I was just leaving." Bernard grabbed her hand and gently led her away from the house. When they were out of sight, Annabelle yanked her hand away. "Your mother," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Bernard, how could you?" Bernard's throat tightened. "Annabelle, please let me explain." She shook her head. "No. I understand everything now." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she turned and walked away. And for the first time, Bernard realized he wasn't just lying to his wife. He was losing her. Annabelle walked away from Madame Veronica's mansion, her chest tightening with every step. Bernard's words echoed in her mind. "This is my mother." She felt like the earth had cracked beneath her feet. Bernard, her husband, the man she loved and trusted, had denied her in front of another woman. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she hailed a taxi. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she felt numb. The Bernard she thought she knew wouldn't have done this to her. When she reached home, she locked herself in the bedroom and cried until her body felt weak. Bernard walked into their home late that night, bracing himself for Annabelle's anger. But the house was eerily silent. He found her sitting on the bed, her back facing him. "Annabelle, please. Let me explain," he said softly. She didn't move. "Annabelle." He tried again. She finally turned to face him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Explain what, Bernard?" Her voice was quiet but filled with pain. Bernard swallowed hard. "I had no choice. Madame Veronica said she wouldn't hire a married man. I had to lie about my status so I could keep the job and provide for us." Annabelle stared at him, her gaze piercing. "So that's all it was? Just a job?" Bernard's heartbeat quickened. "Yes. It was only about work. Nothing more." Annabelle studied his face. "Bernard, look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. Was it really just about the job?" Bernard didn't blink. "Yes. It was never about anything else." Annabelle let out a bitter laugh. "You're lying to me again." Bernard felt his stomach twist. "No, Annabelle, I swear." She cut him off. "Bernard, I saw the way that woman looked at you. And the way you looked at her. Tell me the truth." Bernard clenched his fists. "There's nothing to tell." Annabelle wiped her tears, shaking her head. "I don't believe you." She turned away from him, and Bernard knew that even though he had lied to save himself, she wasn't convinced. The following days were tense. Annabelle barely spoke to him. She cooked his meals but never ate with him. When he tried to touch her at night, she turned away. Bernard felt like he was living with a ghost. One evening, he sat beside her on the couch and reached for her hand. "Annabelle, please don't push me away." She pulled her hand back. "I'm not pushing you away, Bernard. You did that yourself." Bernard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to do? Quit my job? Will that make you believe me?" Annabelle scoffed. "You don't have to quit your job, Bernard. You just have to stop lying to me." Bernard hesitated. Annabelle shook her head. "You can't even promise that, can you?" She stood up and walked to the bedroom, leaving Bernard sitting in silence. The following day, Madame Veronica was scrolling through Facebook on her tablet when something caught her eye. It was Bernard's profile. She clicked on it and gasped. Wedding pictures. Bernard and Annabelle, smiling, dressed in their wedding outfits. The caption read, "Married to my queen for 2 years." Madame Veronica's blood boiled. That liar. She had given him everything: money, comfort, status, and he had played her for a fool. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. "Bernard," she said coldly. "Come to my house. Now." Bernard arrived at the mansion, confused and uneasy. When he walked into the living room, Madame Veronica was waiting, his Facebook profile open on her tablet. "Sit," she ordered. Bernard hesitated. "Ma, is something wrong?" She turned the tablet toward him. "Explain this." Bernard's blood turned to ice. The wedding pictures. His mind raced. He could lie. Try to twist the truth. But he knew it was useless. Madame Veronica stood up, her voice trembling with rage. You told me you were single. Ma, She cut him off. You lied to me. Bernard's throat tightened. Ma, please let me explain. Explain what? She hissed. That you used me? That you played me like a fool? Bernard lowered his head. I didn't mean to. Get out, she screamed. Bernard didn't wait. He turned and ran out of the house, his heart pounding. When Bernard reached home, Annabelle was sitting outside, staring at the night sky. He sat beside her, his shoulders heavy with regret. I lost my job, he said quietly. Annabelle didn't react. She just closed her eyes. I knew this day would come. Bernard swallowed hard. I messed up, Annabelle. She finally turned to face him. Tell me the truth, Bernard. Everything. Bernard hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. He told her everything. That Madame Veronica had offered him more than just a job. That he had lied not just to keep the job but because he had gotten involved with her. That when Annabelle confronted him at the mansion he had denied her. Not just because of the job but because he had been living a double life. By the time he finished, Annabelle was crying. You chose money over me, she whispered. You chose her over me. Bernard felt his own eyes burn with tears. I was stupid. I was weak. I thought I was doing the right thing for us, but I was wrong. Annabelle wiped her tears. And now what? Bernard took her hands, his voice breaking. I will spend the rest of my life making this right. If you can ever forgive me, Annabelle, I promise, I will never fail you again. Annabelle stared at him for a long time. Then she stood up. I need time, Bernard. She walked into the house, leaving him alone in the dark. Bernard buried his face in his hands. He had broken the heart of the only woman who truly loved him. Now he could only hope it wasn't too late to fix it. Bernard sat outside for a long time, staring at the dark sky. The weight of his mistakes crushed him. He had hurt the one person who truly loved him. He had chased after money, blinded by greed, and now he had lost everything. His job, his dignity, and worst of all, Annabelle's trust. For the first time in his life he felt completely lost. Annabelle barely spoke to him for days. She moved around the house silently, doing her chores, but there was no warmth in her eyes. Bernard tried everything. He apologized, he begged, he promised to change. But Annabelle wasn't ready to listen. One evening, as she was folding clothes, Bernard knelt before her. Annabelle, please. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything to fix this. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain. You can't just fix this, Bernard. You broke something inside me. Bernard's heart ached. I was stupid. I thought money was the answer, but I was wrong. I just want you to give me one more chance. Annabelle shook her head. I don't know if I can. She stood up and walked away, leaving him on his knees. Days turned into weeks. The silence in their home became unbearable. Bernard knew he couldn't undo the past, but he had to prove to Annabelle that he was truly sorry. One evening he sat beside her on the couch. Annabelle, I've been thinking, we still have some of the money I earned. What if we start something together? Annabelle turned to him, confused. Start what? A business, Bernard said. Something we can build together. I don't want to work for anyone else. I want to work for us. Annabelle studied him for a moment. And what if the money runs out? Will you go back to lying and chasing after rich women? Bernard shook his head firmly. Never again. I've learned my lesson, Annabelle. I just want us to build something honest. Something we can be proud of. Annabelle sighed. What kind of business are you thinking about? Bernard's heart lifted slightly. She was listening. A supermarket, he said. People will always need food and supplies. We can start small and grow over time. Annabelle was silent for a long time. Then she said, let me think about it. For Bernard, that was enough hope to hold on to. The days that followed were slow, but something was changing. Annabelle started talking to Bernard again. Not much, but it was better than silence. She let him help her in the kitchen, she let him sit beside her in the evenings, and sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, Bernard caught her watching him with something that almost looked like hope. One night as they lay in bed, Annabelle spoke softly. I don't know if I'll ever forget what you did, Bernard, she said. But I do know that I still love you. Bernard turned to face her, his heart swelling. And I love you, Annabelle. More than anything. She took a deep breath. Let's try again. Let's open the supermarket. Let's see if we can fix what's broken. Bernard felt tears sting his eyes. He reached for her hand and held it tightly. "I won't let you down again," he whispered. They used their savings to rent a small shop in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Bernard worked tirelessly arranging goods, talking to suppliers, and making sure they got the best deals. Annabelle handled the customers, her warm smile bringing people back every day. Slowly, business began to grow. One evening, as they counted their earnings for the day, Bernard looked at Annabelle and smiled. "We did it," he said. Annabelle smiled back, and for the first time in a long time, it reached her eyes. "Yes, we did." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Bernard knew then that forgiveness was not something that happened overnight. It was something that had to be earned, every single day. And he was ready to spend the rest of his life doing just that. As the days turned into weeks, Bernard and Annabelle's small supermarket began to thrive. The community welcomed them warmly, and word spread that their shop had fair prices and excellent service. Annabelle still carried the scars of Bernard's betrayal, but she saw his efforts. He woke up early every day, worked tirelessly, and treated her with the love and care he had once abandoned. One evening after closing the shop, they sat together outside their home watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about the past?" Annabelle asked, her voice quiet. Bernard exhaled deeply. "Every day," he admitted. "And every day I wish I could change it." Annabelle looked at him. "You can't change the past, Bernard. But you can prove that you're a different man now." Bernard turned to her, eyes full of emotion. "And that's exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life." She gave him a small smile, and for the first time in a long time, Bernard felt like they were truly healing. Months passed and their business continued to grow. They saved enough money to expand, buying more goods and hiring a shop assistant to help with the workload. One day, as Bernard was restocking shelves, his phone rang. When he checked the caller ID, his breath caught. It was her. Madame Veronica. He hesitated before answering. "Hello." Her voice was smooth, calculated. "Bernard. It's been a while." Bernard clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" "I heard about your little supermarket," she said. "I must say I'm impressed. But tell me, are you truly satisfied with such a small life?" Bernard gripped the phone tighter. "It's not a small life to me. It's an honest one." Madame Veronica laughed softly. "Honest? Come on, Bernard. I could give you more. Money. Luxury. A better future." Bernard closed his eyes. Once her words would have tempted him. But now they only reminded him of everything he had almost lost. "No," he said firmly. "I have everything I need. Don't call me again." He ended the call and blocked her number. When he turned around, Annabelle was standing behind him. "You answered the call," she said, her expression unreadable. Bernard nodded. "I did. And I told her never to contact me again." Annabelle studied his face, searching for any sign of doubt. Finally she nodded. "Good." She turned to walk away but then stopped. "Bernard," she said softly. "Yes." She looked at him, a warmth in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm proud of you." Bernard felt his heart swell. At that moment he knew he had finally won back the trust of the woman he loved. And this time he would never let it go.